Alrighty. So this will get deep down. When you were a kid, what did you hope to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be an optometrist because I had a teacher who was really cool and very helped me understand that female empowerment was necessary in the world. I didn't know that that's what was happening then. And she did career studies with us, and some survey told me I should be an optometrist. And then in high school, I have really bad eyesight, and I had something happen to my eye, and I realized that optometrists have to not only help healthy people, but have to help people who have bad things happen to their eyes that look gross. And I was like, yep, nope, that is not going to happen. that killed a long childhood dream that I had mapped out for myself.
Hey, but you're doing great things now. It worked out for you.
And I didn't know, we didn't know that this stuff was an option when we were little, right? We didn't know what we could dream of doing.
That's very true. How did you find yourself doing what you do now? What was your journey like?
So my journey started by getting in a lot of trouble and being voluntold by my dad to do some community service. So my dad is a servant leader in the world and believes that you should do and give to your community. And so his version of trying to get me back on the right path was to highly suggest opportunities for me. That included everything from envelope stuffing at his office to a role that actually led me to this. So I live in a small town in Iowa, and there was not a coordinated children's mental health system. And so there was a grant that was given to 6 counties to try to figure out how to make a coordinated system. And that grant required youth engagement, and there was a very specific list about what that meant. And one of them was you need youth with lived experience on your governance board. And this was 13 years ago, and no one knew what that meant. And they couldn't find any youth, and they're like, our funder is going to report badly. And so my dad is like, I will volunteer my daughter to join this committee. That actually was what started my work. So I worked locally here, just in monthly meetings, providing advice, talking about how do I access services? It's confusing that your telephone numbers go to buildings that I don't understand and navigate. And then the folks that I was working with here in Iowa were attending national events, and they introduced me. They took me to a conference in Nashville, Tennessee, actually at the same building that some of the Connected Young people got to meet in Nashville. And they introduced me to, they walked me into a room and said, this is Youth Move. And there were a bunch of other youngish people who were doing what I was doing, sitting on their governance boards in their communities. And I never left the work since meeting them. So a little fortuitous and unexpected along the way.
So the pilot side's 5.0 at this point. That's awesome.
Right. I feel a great affinity with, we have new young influencers coming on. And as I did orientation calls with them, they're like, I don't know, Chet told me I should do this, so here I am, right? And I was like, yes, that's an okay door to walk into this change work. Maybe you'll love this, or maybe you'll take this change work and change the world for a better place in another way. But this is a friendly way to join the work.
It is. And you just get used to it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
How would you describe what you do to people that are not familiar with the work?
That is such a good question. um, so I always try to make a connection to mental health because we all have mental health. And I usually make the connection to just like general mental health and not sort of like deep end services because I don't want like the stigma to get in the way of people understanding the work that I do. So I start with an entry point like mental health and then describe what we mean by lived experience. So that might, and then connect to the fact that I believe that youth with lived experience should be the ones to make the change. So that might sound something like I work with young people who've experienced mental health challenges, and because they've received services and support from our system, they know what works and what didn't work, or what they wish they could have had access to, they didn't. And my job is to help make sure that their feedback and their voice is heard by systems, and specifically those that have the power to change policy and make systems better. And my goal is just to make sure that young people are heard in that process.
It's pretty straightforward. I mean, it could get very complicated to try to explain that.
Right.
Trust me, because I've had those problems or like trying to tell people what I do. I'm just like it's kind of hard. So you really, those 13 years of experience have really helped you get your elevator speech good.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, you always change that, right? Like if someone knows the work, then you can like share the jargon. Right. But really, we're sort of in a tiny bubble. I think about like the people that actually work in and understand youth serving systems is actually like a tiny group of people, and most people are outside of that bubble. So how do we like talk just directly in really plain language so they can buy into like the value of the work, even though they don't understand, they may not understand the nitty gritty.
Right. So when you go back to when you first started, where did you feel like that shift happened of you actually wanting to stay there like full time?
That's a really good question. So when I met Youth Move, they were just starting, they had formed themselves as a board of directors, and were overseeing not yet a full organization, but like overseeing a program that was housed in another organization. And after I met and worked with them, I joined the board. And so I served 2 terms on the board, and that largely covered the time that I went to college and spent sort of a year after college not knowing what I was going to do. That was the Youth Move was sort of like my volunteer role that kept me really grounded and was a constant while everything else changed. And when the terms were 2 years, and the last year I served was really intense. We actually wrote our bylaws, and we filed to become a nonprofit organization with the IRS. And we separated from an organization. So there was coalition building and collaboration and conflict management and all of that. And I was like, okay, you guys, I just gave you a lot of my energy, and I think life's taken me a different direction. And so I indicated that like when my term is done, I'm done. I'm going to go back and be a natural foods educator, which is what I was going to school for. And I was like, see you later. And I can't say no. I still don't know how to say no. So people knew that I was going to be leaving sort of like in the fall. And so they signed me up for all the committees. And my last job, and I was like, this is the last thing I'm doing, was to write the job descriptions for what would be Youth Move National's first employees that we chose and hired. And that was sort of the last thing I did. And I remember where I was standing, and I was on the phone in my bedroom, and I was like, yep, these job descriptions are final. We should go. And our board president said, okay, so if anyone on the board is planning to apply for these positions, you need to get off the phone now, because we're going to talk about how we score the applicants that we interview. And like up until that moment, that had not been my plan. And he said those words, and I was like, I think I have to get off the phone. And I did. I hung up. I said, I think I'm thinking about this. And I hung up, and sure enough, I walked into an interview later, and eventually was hired, our first hire, to work with our chapter members. So as our first chapter coordinator. But even that felt not real to me. It was a part-time job. We didn't have enough money for a full-time job. I felt like I was doing it mostly because I didn't know how to say goodbye. And the youth movers had become like so much a part of my life, and they were my friends and my peers and my family. And so I still kept planning to leave. Like, oh, I'm just going to be here till like other staff get underway, or I'm just going to be there until someone else changes, we find someone better. And it wasn't until I went to a leadership retreat for mental health change agents. And I spent 5 days with amazing coaches and just a really deep experience and a lot of self-challenge that I was able to sort of look at myself and go, no, I think I can believe that I could be a leader and I could stay in this movement and I could do good work. And I walked out of that retreat with a commitment to say, this is where I want to be. And I moved to a full-time role shortly after that and have never left. So I tried to leave a lot of times, Jessica, before I got to the point that I was like, I think this is where I need to be.
Sometimes the things that you're working on, like saying no, sometimes come in handy with things like this. Awesome. So I guess now we can talk about your connected experience. And
Great.
Obviously you are part of the connected experience. You were the first ones that like made this all happen. But how did that happen? Like, what was the meeting? Like, what shifted in it? And what was like, we need to do this?
So I think the shift happened in the initial design meeting. So the National Council team brought the partners together for an in-person meeting in Washington, D.C. It was in the summer for a couple of days. A lot of us didn't know each other, like had never worked together before. And so we were both sort of asked to like step into a space and immediately trust everybody in the room and like immediately put your best ideas on a piece of white paper about how we should change the world for youth who are experiencing anxiety and depression. We met for 2 days, and it wasn't all roses, right? Like we disagreed with each other on things. We would go into small groups and we would make a plan and we'd come back and pitch it to the other group and realize we had gone down like two entirely different roads. And we're like, well, we can't do both of those things. Right. There was a lot of circle time, but I think the sort of magic, or when I realized that like this project was going to have something special going on, was when we were able to work through these like moments of tension and like land on the other side and be like, wow, this is so much better and cooler because we just went through that hard stuff. And I was like, I want to stay a part of a group that's willing to do that and to really change when we realize we need to change, because that's not how the traditional mental health system works, right? Like the traditional mental health system doesn't change, doesn't like tension, doesn't like to make new things. So, yeah, and it wasn't named yet. It was the Adolescent Mental Health Roadmap Project or something.
Oh, that's a very long name.
It was gross. And I'm like, we don't say the word adolescent. That is like not in my vocabulary. But we kept saying certain words over and over again. And one of them was connection. And so sometime after that, we were like, someone decided this is the name.
That's awesome. So when was that? 2018? Or has it been?
It must have been. Yeah, like the summer of 2018. Yeah.
That's awesome. You all got up and ready to move and get it grooving.
So fast. Yes.
So
I have this note. Yeah. Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I have this, it's not this notebook. Usually my connected notebook is right next to me. And I have like pages of notes from the startup. And every once in a while when I'm flipping for a new page, I'm like, oh, that was intense. We moved really fast.
Yes. So with everything going so intense and like with disagreements, when was it when you knew that this was going to be a great opportunity for not only the pilot sites, for like yourself, or for anything that you felt like?
I had a lot of faith from the beginning, just because this is such a non-traditional funder in the field. And so I was like sort of ready to work for any project that was going to change mental health and not be funded by the federal government. Just looking for a place. I just felt really hopeful that this would be a place where we could be really creative and sort of challenge the usual way of doing business. So I think I've always had a lot of hope. I think I felt particularly sure that like change was going to be able to happen, and that pilot sites would really experience transformation and really try totally new things in this project during our first in-person meeting in Nashville, where and not like when we're in the whole group, but when I got to like sit just at the table and just talk to the folks from Whatcom and see who they were and see all of these really amazing individuals who had super powerful stories, young people and adults. And I was like, oh, Connected brought them together. Connected is investing in them so that they can put their brains together and good things are going to happen. And so that's, I think, what I really knew, like change will happen because of this project.
That's awesome. It's been a long coming.
Yeah.
Is there a particular story that stands out in your mind when you think about your work with the pilot communities?
There are so many stories. This is where I'm like, this is about the evaluation of the impact of the project. I should like pick a super important moment.
It's just you and me.
It doesn't have to be. Okay. I can't remember when this happened, but I remember sort of like what the room looked like. John, one of the youth consultants, sort of pushed into the conversation and created space to say thank you for the opportunity. But you know, John, he doesn't just like say 2 or 3 words. He always like comes out with this like font of wisdom. And there was a combination of young people and adults in the room when he was able to just sort of say like thank you, and that this being a part of Connected was this like really seminal moment for him, and it came in a time of his life that he really needed it. And he was just able to articulate sort of why the impact was happening and express his gratitude and share his lived experience and make us all cry in the same moment. And those are sort of moments where like, I hope that's happening for people individually. And I know it's going to happen for a different person at a different time throughout this journey, but to have someone be so brave and so vulnerable and so public about that was like just a really important moment.
He's awesome. I felt like I'm there and I wasn't there. Yeah. So what do you wish could change about how society treats young people and how society treats mental health?
So I would like to shift the power dynamic in society to give young people more equal footing. So I just believe, and all of my work stems from the fact that young people have wisdom, and wisdom and expertise doesn't only come from years on the planet. A certain kind of wisdom and expertise comes from years of experience, but it's not the only sort of perspective we should be valuing. And young people's, just like young people need to have long-term hope and vision because they have more life to live in front of them and can come with sort of enthusiasm and innovation and creativity and are not stuck in the, this is how we used to do things mentality. And I really wish that young people's perspectives and their expertise like that could be weighted equally with all of the other generations living with them in the moment. And to me, that would require a power shift. And so that's my hope for young people. I hope that I want to work myself out of a job, right? So I feel like our organization spends so much time like convincing other people they should invite youth to the table. I don't want that to be a job in the world, right? I want everyone to just invite young people to the table. And then in relation to like how I wish that society would view mental health, one, I think we really need to challenge the definition of mental health. I think it's very like privileged white Americans who have defined mental health and mental wellness. And if we had a more expansive, sort of multidimensional, holistic understanding of mental health, that would serve us all better. And I would like us all to walk around and not only think about like our muscles, but to think about our mental health in the same sort of way. And if we did that individually, I think that means we would talk about things differently. I think it would dismantle the stigma and discrimination people with mental health diagnoses experience. So it's like that if individually we could change our definition, then collectively we could engage around mental health in a different way. That might move from being a society that thinks self-care is important to a society that believes collective care is a requirement. I want to get there, right?
Right. I mean, self-care is one thing, like we've gotten that far, but like, how are we going to take it to that extra step? Like, it's not just bubble baths. And
it is not. And no amount of bubble baths is really going to solve your problems.
Yeah. No.
Hate to break it to
you. Let's be real here.
Yeah.
So how do you think Connected fits into the changes that you see?
So I think this first part of Connected that we're in right now is a learning playground, where we got to practice a lot of things, right? And practice importantly at the local community level and specific agency level and coalition level, but then in a peer group together, and now starting to explore what needs to happen or shift in the policy world to continue some of these transformations. So we got to like practice and play and take risks because someone was giving us a little bit of money. So we could do something unusual. And if we failed or if we found out it didn't work, it wasn't going to be the end of our organizations doing business. I also think that this journey of Connected is the start of a longer Connected. I've been calling it the Connected legacy. And that comes with how do we take what we've learned here and transpose it into the world in a way that others can benefit from those lessons. And I think there's a lot of potential about where Connected could go in further iterations. But I think this playground and this learning and this opportunity and even invitation to take risks and do things a little bit differently than traditional mental health services is a really important part of Connected.
Right. That's awesome. It's the first step to a whole lot of steps.
Yes.
So what has been the most significant change you've experienced from being involved with this program? This could be changes in your ideas about yourself, or your community, your health, your social activities, your hope in the future, something that feels important to you that you've experienced from it.
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot of things from this experience. The one that I tussle with the most is learning to stay curious about this concept of youth-adult partnership. This comes up in all the areas of my work, but I think something about the length of time that the Connected Project has run and the sort of layers of the site layer and the national youth consultants and the national partners has just caused me to observe particularly adults struggle with feeling uncomfortable being in relationship with young people where they're sharing decision-making roles or offering accountability. And sometimes I would like find myself going, it's not that hard. Why are people making this feel so hard? And I just have continued to challenge myself to stay curious in that space versus going to like a judgment or a decision-making space. And I think I've also, I don't know if I can articulate what I've learned yet, but there's been some sort of magic sauce that's happened by young people from so many different places and so many different backgrounds, just being given space to build community together. And this concept, and I think that we'll explore this like in our findings over the whole project, this concept of like being able to start to belong to a community that is not defined geographically is really intriguing to me. And I want to continue to dig into that to be able to articulate like learnings about that, 6 months from now. Yeah.
So you talked about that power shift and people feeling comfortable about being in the same room with young people and like sharing the same opinions or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've seen that happen with Connected? Like you've seen that shift, or like where you've seen like something similar to that? I mean, we people aren't perfect. They're not going to come in here and just like know right away how to walk into a room with young people and like be willing to take a step down. But like, it's always important to see that shift and see that the work is actually being done.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I've seen people shift in this project. I think maybe what's most interesting is that I saw a shift of like some of our adult partners be like, oh yeah, I'm ready to engage youth. That's a great idea. Like I'm bought into that idea. And I'm good. Like I'm good at that. Nobody said that, right? But there are some people that are like, yeah, I love to hang out with young people. This is going to be the easy part of the project, right? And then they had a shift of like, this is harder than I thought. Like now I need to provide critical feedback to this young person, but I sort of want to be their friend. And what am I supposed to do? And sort of like that, there was like sort of an awareness of like, oh, this is actually adaptive work, right? This is about engaging any new partner in the work. I need to like put energy and time, and it's not just going to come easily. So like that shift has been interesting to watch. And then many of the sites experienced like, we have youth and we invited them to the meeting, but we don't yet know how to listen to them, to months later going, we just shifted our project and we need to make sure that's okay because our young people told us our old project wasn't going to work, right? And we're like, yes. And I think a ton of that happened around the start of the pandemic, right? Where all of a sudden there was this like seismic shift of you were doing work in person. Now you're probably going to have to do your work virtually. And I think young people were able to be more creative in that space earlier, and therefore like had ideas to push and shift and pivot, which is really great, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. I kind of got off track with that question, but I just thought it's important. Like that's one of the key things. Like if that's important to you, I feel like it's going to be important to see that in like the Connected project. So I feel like that's important and crucial for everybody. So how will this change affect you in the future? Like what you talked about before, I asked you that sidetrack question, and like what you talked about in the sidetrack question. How do you think it'll affect you in the future?
I want to invite youth into the planning process earlier. So not, we're going to apply for a grant, then we're going to have planning meetings, and we're going to decide at that planning meeting that we should have youth advisors, and then we're going to go find them. But just take a risk and be like, hey, I've got youth advisors from day one. I think that is a really big finding. And sometimes, I mean, I work for an organization that has a lot of youth advisory stuff going on, and young people can tell us what to do, but we still can be sort of traditional in nature. Like, let's see if we get the funding before we invite young people to the table. Like, I don't want them to be disappointed if we build a project and we can't do it. I think this project has allowed me to feel like I can take more risks and it would be okay to try for something with youth as partners and not and not have it fall through, like our results, because they're there, might be stronger. So I think there's been like a confidence building for me in that. And I also, I really like to think about, like, I love systems change puzzles, and the thinking about where is there a lever to push to make a sustainable change. And I really enjoyed the Connected project and thinking about change at the local site, change amongst the collective of the pilot sites, and then this translation of these individual pilots learned something, and therefore we could push these levers over here in communities that Connected didn't touch, but we learned something about systems change that we can transfer there. And I think the exact sort of levers that we learned about are just being articulated now, but I'm loving thinking about how learning collaboratives are valuable for the system to make change. Like, piloting like this is an important part of making big change. And so I just am taking a ton of little tiny learnings from the structure of Connected that I'm sure I'll drop in.
Yeah, it's like a TV show without a good pilot site. It's not going to air. It's not going to work out.
Yeah. And in a world of people who are like, prove to me that that works, having a pilot site and being able to have this learning playground is so important to being able to answer that question later.
So from everything that we've learned in like this year and a half, is there going to be like a Connected 2.0, do you think?
I sure hope so. I think the plan, I don't know. I think the partners at all the partners at the table and at the pilot sites are like, well, we should plan for 2.0 rather than not planning for it. And, Jessica, I don't know if that means if Pivotal as a funder funds a Connected 2.0, or if any of our partners in another space says, I learned all this stuff from Connected, let's take it to the 2.0, right? Like, I think we should, as long as we're willing to be really creative in our vision for what Connected 2.0 looks like, yeah, I think there's a place for it to go.
That's awesome. That's so exciting. The potential of Connected is very high up there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think I'm out of questions. I think I answered the impact on your future, and then getting to know you, Johanna, has been really cool. I didn't know that you've been in Youth Move for like 13 years. That's a long time.
Forever. Yeah. It doesn't feel like 13 years. And
I bet. No.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't like think about it. It's just something that happens day by day, right? And then all of a sudden you're here. But
if like they say, you don't work a day in your life if you love what you're doing.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for asking me all these questions.